We're now going to transition into some question and answer, which really can be conversation of any kind between the two of you. I will be speaking on behalf of the Q&A, so on the audience here, unseen in the screen. Make sure that we are in gallery view and that everyone is visible here. A question that I carry for both of you is in regards to the work that you hold intergenerationally, both within your communities, within your tribal communities and beyond. That would be through the ancestors past as well as future ancestors, the youth in your community, and the space that you all hold together for the preservation of the Indigenous wisdom that lives in all of you, as well as meeting the, I'll say, challenges of existing in this time, living in this time, and in the recovery of your cultures from the genocide that occurred in this land.
That is a very challenging thing. As I was walking the land that we are on the edge of acquiring very soon, I was looking at the creek that runs along the edge of it and seeing how choked with debris and weeds and overgrowth because it hadn't been cared for in such a long time. And it's, for us not having any land, that amount is pretty sizable. But in the greater scheme of things of the San Francisco Peninsula, it's a small little patch. But I'm thinking of how much that's multiplied by all the other places that aren't taken care of. So the challenge is daunting. But I think our elders taught us that, whatever your path is, you start it with taking one step, and then you take another, and then you take another. And you don't want to take your eyes off the end of the road, but you also have to pay attention to what's right in front of you. And sometimes if you focus on that, the length of the path might not be so daunting. And it also, by keeping your head down and to the business at hand, you hopefully won't trip. And I think that's part of the challenge today too. I was sharing with the people in our coalition that to me, when we walked down towards the creek and saw all that overgrowth that had been happening for the last 250 years, and then having to deal with the process of reacquiring that land, which is another kind of overgrowth, what other people call bureaucracy and legalities. That is also a pretty massive challenge for Native people, we're finding out. Even on the part of agencies and people that want to help us and give us land and work with us, then they have to stop and say, oh, well, I'm not sure how we can do this. Let me get back to you. And then they gather their lawyers and accountants and CPAs and legal people, and they have to create a process for that to happen. So we're still in the midst of that. That's probably one reason why very few Native communities have been able to get any of their land back, especially on federally recognized tribes. That's an especial challenge. So we feel very fortunate that this opportunity came our way. In other areas, I've been working on that possibility for 30 years and saw a number of projects collapse. So we're very grateful that this one, we see no signs that it'll stop. It's just a matter of filling out the paper forms and signing on the dotted line, and away we go. So hopefully we'll have some good news in a very short time.
I want to say congratulations to Gregg and the ramaytush community. That is a huge accomplishment. And when I heard about it on Friday of last week, I met just more evidence that it's time. It's time for things to change. It's time for the indigenous people to relearn that knowledge and, and to restore that, not relearn it, restore that knowledge, to bring it back and to demonstrate to others how to do it. Both because of the history that we've shared, we've lost a tremendous amount of that indigenous knowledge. And to be quite honest, at first it was quite embarrassing to even think about this because when you talk about taking care of Mother Earth, well, how do you do that? You go, well, I don't know yet. We need to think and pray and find out exactly what that means. And whenever people will say, well, what is this plant? Is this a medicine plant, food plant? What do you guys use this plant for? What is this plant in your language? What is, do you have a song? What are your songs? What is, and because of that periods of just total erasure of all our knowledge and our traditions and our ways, it made it very difficult. And sometimes you just say, well, maybe I should just assimilate. Maybe we use the term crossover. Maybe we should just cross over and forget it. Maybe that just so many times it seemed like just so much easier. You just cross over and forget it and go get a job, come home and drink your beer and be happy, But that wasn't good enough. That's not why we were here. And so whenever we started down this thing of restoring that knowledge, we first tried to get the knowledge of our elders and stuff like that, and learn from them as best we can. Then we learn from our neighboring tribes, and then we started reaching out further and further to tribes. Today we work with the Kumeyaay, we work with the Yurok, the Klamath. We work with tribes north to south, and sharing knowledge and sharing stewardship, etc. We also learned, we were invited to work on an archaeology project north of Santa Cruz, about 25 miles north of Santa Cruz. And when they asked if we wanted to be part of the research, no way, why in the world would we ever do that? We knew archaeologists as people that just wanted to dig up the remains of our ancestors and put those ancestors in a museum or a fireplace mantle somewhere. And we said, no way would we ever do that. But then we had a member who was going to be part of that study team, and he talked to us and said, why don't you listen to what they want to do? They have some techniques they want to use that are not going to do that destructive stuff. And so we talked to them, and anyway, we agreed, provided we had yes/no authority on every step of the way related to cultural resources, that we would do it. And we sure learned a lot. We learned about what the landscapes looked like, what plants were there, what fish were there, what mammals were eaten. We learned what, they had, there's the prevalent nut there was hazelnut, not acorn. We learned that there was tobacco there. Tobacco does not grow on the coast, so there was trade routes. So we look for trade routes in the over the mountains and stuff like that. We learned a tremendous amount. So now we count archaeology and research as being a very important tool for helping us restore that knowledge, so that we can restore the landscapes back to the pre-contact condition. And then finally, we had a source who left a lot of information with the Smithsonian Institute, and we use that knowledge also to help us restore it. We believe that over time we'll be able to restore 90 to 95% of our indigenous knowledge, so that we can return to the path of our ancestors and fulfill our obligation to Creator. And so that's what we work on now every day.
Again, thank you both. I know land misses you, your people, so much. A few more questions have come through from our crowd. First with thank you to both of you, for both of your wonderful presentations that have enriched our understandings of the history of this land we call California. You've shared so much important food for thought. Chairman Val mentioned that we need to help young people understand the true riches of relationships, knowledge, and spirituality. I'm wondering about some of your favorite strategies that might be helpful for college students and our larger community.
Greg, you want to go first? Because I know you work
Sure.
with a lot of university students, et cetera.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we don't believe work anymore, which is somewhat endemic with society, is the hierarchical top-down model, where you have people that are experts in your society teaching everyone else their knowledge and kind of binding them within that knowledge. And by that, I mean, they, in experiences I've had with various scientific, disciplines, it's hard for them to get outside that box. There's so much to do within that box of science, whether you're an archaeologist, a geologist, whatever it is, it's such a siloed approach to the world that they feel bound by it because they got to learn everything in the box and never get outside of it. And I think that applies at an individual level. So by that, I mean, I think we need to start at the youngest level, the lowest level. And one of our young Ohlone people has a good term for it. It's called nature deficit syndrome. You need to just get them out of the classroom and get them out in the land. You need to get their feet in the dirt. That it starts with the fundamental relationship as human beings that we're all given, whether we realize it or not. When you get out on the land, and that's what our elders tell us, we as Val was talking about, we are challenged. Oops. Sorry about that.
Nice recovery.
It wasn't me, it was the internet. It bounced me out. Maybe I said the wrong thing and somebody's listening. I don't know. But I think our elders, as Val said, have told us we've lost a lot, but we haven't lost as much as we think. And there's a couple of ways of approaching that. And one is just getting out in the land. As our elders tell us, the land holds the knowledge. Back in our beginning stories, they tell us that's where we got the knowledge in the first place, from the first people and from the land itself. It taught us. And if we believe that, it can teach us again. And it really has to, in a sense, because the challenge now is, yes, bringing that indigenous knowledge back to apply to the land. But the land itself is different now. It's been extremely damaged over the last 250 years. So we can't automatically take a match out and start burning things. It has to be looked at and cared for, just like you were taking care of somebody before you start surgery. You have to do certain things to get the health of the land to a point where those elements can be brought to bear, like cultural burning. Of indigenous knowledge, taking our old knowledge, taking it from other people, and like Val said, there's other communities that are sharing their knowledge across the board, and I've gotten to know them over the years, and now I'm being able to bring it to bear. But on this piece of land, it's different land, and it doesn't necessarily know us as well as it used to. So we have to reintroduce ourselves to it. And so there's things we have to do to it in a new way to get it to a place where we then can practice our culture. So that's even more of a challenge, but that's a challenge we're willing to do because we have to as indigenous people.
Well, the question, when you were asking the question, I was remembering I was speaking to a fourth grade class. That's the year that they teach about the California missions here in California. And I was talking to a fourth grade class, and there you got to be careful about how you teach the history and what you say about the missions. You don't want to traumatize those kids too much, because that history can certainly do that. And at the end of the talk, a fourth grader raised her hand and asked, "How can we help?" And I had never asked that, had that question asked of me before. And and so I was trying to, think of something, man, think of something. And but what came to, what I thought of, and I'm sure that the ancestors shared that with me to share, is that, the way I responded, I says, well, I go, "Do you like butterflies?" And she says, "Yes." I says, "Well, butterflies have certain plants that have a certain plant that they need and that they love." I go, "Why don't you go to the library and study what plant is important for the butterfly, and then plant some in your backyard. And if you can't, plant some in your front yard too. And that way, whenever the plants come through the area and stuff like that, they can get the food that they need and stuff like that, and it'll make your backyard more beautiful." And she really liked that. And I said, "Then you could do the same thing for the ladybugs and the other bugs as well, and stuff like that." And so all the kids got excited and started talking about what they were going to do and what they could do. So that's just kind of getting them excited at that point there, starting to create relationships with the wildlife and with the plants and such. And then I said, "And if you listen carefully, those plants, sing to them and pray to them and talk to them and listen to them. They'll talk to you, And it's that whole issue of creating a relationship. And that's what we need to do. Mother Earth carries the knowledge, just as Gregg said, but we have to have that relationship so that Mother Earth trusts us, so that they know that we will have that healthy relationship that we talk about." I'll stop there.
Thank you. Carrying on with the questions. Someone is wondering what it means to each of you that the state is finally calling for the formal reintroduction of cultural burning. I heard Gregg mention a couple times, you can't just light a match and toss it out there. So
no matter how tempting it is. But I think it's the right direction. But as in much of modern culture, and especially in modern government, I'm always worried and concerned about how much is surface, a facade, even if not purposeful facade, or just marketing, because this is deep, hard work. It takes years. They don't think in those terms. They think in terms of budget cycle. And actually, they think in terms of election cycles. So, and we're talking about things that need to plan. You have to plan out for the next at least 30 years on a step-to-step basis. On the land we were on today, and we're just talking about approximately 38 acres. That's what we're thinking. What's going to happen in 1 year? What's going to happen in 5 years? But what's going to happen in 30 years to get it back to where it needs to be in the long term, to be able to hold things like salmon reintroduction, for instance. And the government's really bad at thinking that far ahead. It really is. It may talk it. You may see documents that say it, but then when it comes to implementing it doesn't happen that often. So with this, for two reasons, because climate change is real and it's here right now, and we can't wait any longer. The damage is great already. And, our survival is in question here. Mother Earth has demonstrated more than once that it likes us, it loves us, it wants to hear us sing to it, but it doesn't need us. And if we don't behave, it might, do something. Or as the old commercials used to say back in the 60s, it's not nice to fool Mother Nature. And it will take care of itself if it needs to, if we don't do it. So that's always the urgency in dealing with governments, is like impressing upon them, you got to do this, you got to do this now, and you got to do it in perpetuity. You can't just do it for the next 5 years. So that's always the concern for me, is, you know, following election cycles and office, politics and those sorts of things, that trying to sustain a long-term plan, because doing something for a year or two is going to have no effect, and it's going to waste a lot of resources, to be honest. I wouldn't say it's not worth doing, but it will just be a dramatic drain on the communities like ours that is so small. We can't waste a precious minute or dollar because we hardly have any to begin with. So everything has to be effective for us at our level. And dealing with a government that has a track record of working well with Native people is pretty daunting.
We do a lot of work in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And the Santa Cruz Mountains recently experienced those devastating fires. And before those fires, we talked about coming in with a cultural burn, and I'll describe the difference of a cultural burn and prescribed burn, because there are differences. But if we talked about coming in with fire to anyone, they were no way. I mean, they were immediately opposed to it. Fire is too dangerous, too risky. You'll burn everything down, etc. But now that that fire went through and burned everything down, we get a fresh start. That's the way we're presenting it. Those fires would have never happened if we were if we had indigenous burning today, continuously through today. They would have never happened. There's no need for those fires. And so we've been talking to people, and they're convinced. Believe it or not, CAL FIRE is convinced. And we're working with a lot of partners today to bring back the indigenous burning on these lands that are already burned. The way our people would burn is they would take a look at a landscape and divide it into segments, 5, 7, 10 different segments. And then they would burn one segment each year. But that was to, keep the fuel loads down, and to keep and it was important for managing and maintaining resources. First of all, when you do a cultural burn with a regular cycle like that, fire just creeps along the ground. There's no blazing fire out of control and everything else. It just creeps along the ground. But then, when you burn that first segment of fire that first year, that year after on that year after that fire, you get a huge production of seed plants, because those seeds, they need that fire to germinate. And so you're getting an abundance of seeds, and that's so important for the birds and other seed-eating animals. And even our people, seasonally, our diets would be 40% seed. That second year growth, you get these shoots coming out of the ground, and that was the preferred foods of deer and elk and antelope and other grazing animals. That third year growth, you start getting these bushier, shrubbier plants, and those are important food plants and medicine plants, etc. But also they were still soft and pliable and stuff like that, and that's and then longer now and stuff. So those were the plants were used for nets, for traps, for cordage, etc. And basketry. And then the third, fourth, as materials get thicker, you use them for other kinds of materials and crafting needs. And so, and then after that last segment is over, you go back and you start all over. So you keep that fuel loads down, and you're managing the resources, those food and medicine and basketry resources that are needed by not only for us, but for all wildlife, etc. It's keeping them down. And actually, it's good for the waters too, because whenever you filter water, you're filtering it through carbon. Well, these low impact fires and stuff, at least fire there. So whenever it rains, you get more runoff into the river. So it helps replenish the water supply. Plus it filters it through the carbon that's on the ground there, and it's filtering the water, increasing the water quality and stuff like that. I mean, there's so many benefits to it. And now the scientists are starting to learn that. And they said, look what we discovered, But, because of those fires and the devastation, and they know something different has to happen, we're working on that. We have 3 different demonstrations. We have 3 projects at 3 different locations where we're doing cultural burns now. And each location is 25 acres. And so we're working with CAL FIRE, UC Berkeley, and other partners as well to do that.
Thank you. Sort of in this line of conversation, there's a question of how we might be able to reconcile the institutional gaps that have determined that the first ancestors do not have voices and do not have stories to tell. So how can we reconcile that erasure based on the experiences that you've had interacting with many different institutions? There are, I guess, some kind of leading points to perhaps discuss would be traditional ecological knowledge, in addition to indigenous sacred knowledge, and land trusts, and how relational building is happening and filling the gaps, as was said.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because I think that now it's a race against time, because the wheels of justice move slowly, as they say, and the wheels of government move even much, much slower and are pretty rusty. So to get government and kind of going back to something we were referring to earlier, I've met a lot of people in government that are good-hearted people, and they get it. They understand. We're working with some of them now. But often the problem becomes the system, even the system that they work within, that they're limited by. I've come, many times over 30 years of dealing with somebody who'll say, we get it. We understand what you're saying. We agree with you personally. And the but is the system won't let us, the government, the regulations, the laws, my manager, whatever the issue is, it won't allow it to happen. We sometimes are lucky that we find somebody who can find loopholes in the system, and sometimes they'll even risk their jobs to do the right thing, but that's rare. And the system seems to have a life of its own and is fighting back, because the system doesn't like to change. But it is changing, and it's because of the number of people getting into the system with an more enlightened view. So over the years, I've talked to many college classes, student groups, agencies, organizations, have written and published things years ago. And I, not that I personally have anything to do with that much of it, but I think myself and many other people that have done this work over the years are starting to see a change. And for me personally, it's just a matter of whether the ship Titanic will change fast enough to avoid the iceberg, because the iceberg is climate change. That's the dramatic thing here, whether or not it will motivate people and the system to change fast enough. It's starting to change. We're seeing CAL FIRE starting to consult on actual indigenous protocols for land caretaking on a wider scale. But when we're a wider scale, we're talking about 25 acres, 50 acres here versus maybe several hundred acres, maybe in the thousands in a very few cases. But we are going to have to deal in the millions of acres. And how, the challenge will be, can we scale up fast enough to make a difference before the climate changes us radically? And sometimes desperate people do desperate things, and that's also a concern of mine. So I think it comes down to the individual level, to prepare yourself, to get as much knowledge as you can, and if you can, work with indigenous people. And that's a hard thing to do, actually. Not that we don't want it, but it's just hard for us while we're facing all these other challenges to have an organizational structure that allows other people to come in and help us out. Again, not because of lack of desire, it's the mechanics. Most of us are very resource depleted in terms of people, time, money. Some of us have to work other jobs to even do what little we're able to do out of hours. So that's always a challenge. And yet we do it because we have to. And our culture calls us to do that. Our ancestors call us to do that. But also the needs of the land itself are now so critical that there's a need, have to there as well. And so we start by putting one foot forward, getting a little piece of land, learning from it, and showing it as a demonstration that what we're saying actually can work. And that's the challenge that we are undertaking, the ramaytush people, with our collaboration.
Right now, we're in a pretty unique position because we've been working at a location, that's known as a Quiroste Valley, and that's south of Pescadero on the coast. And we've been working there. We first started doing research with UC Berkeley there in '06, and we've been there continuous ever since. Because there was at that time that when the research results were coming in, we said we want to restore this landscape back to its pre-contact time. And State Parks was willing to work with us in that valley. We got it first designated as a cultural preserve, which is a special designation that allows the state to have a co-management agreement with the tribe to manage that valley. And what we and the whole coast of the central coast of California was a coastal prairie, and it was recognized as the most biodiverse landscape, as one of the most biodiverse landscapes in North America. But whenever they outlawed burning, first during the Mexican period, the Spanish mission period, they outlawed it. The Mexican period and the American period outlawed it. So all those shrubs come in and the trees came in, and now that coastal prairie is gone, and the biodiversity is gone. When people talk about climate change, they talk about the loss of diversity. And so whenever we said we wanted to restore Quiroste Valley back to its pre-contact condition, we were very lucky that the state of California, it's probably just the people in that office, thought that was an interesting idea. Let's give it a shot, because state parks, they don't know how to manage land. Let's make this point real clear here. That, we work only, I talk about healthy relationships. The only ones that we really have healthy relationships with, and they're not even, we're working towards a healthy relationship. We're not there yet. Are people in the environmental and land conservation areas, because we believe that in their heart, they truly want to take care of Mother Earth. At the same time, they don't know how to. They don't know what the heck they're doing. And they need us. And they're starting to acknowledge and recognize that they need us. And so there at Quiroste Valley, we say we want to cut the trees and we want to clear out this valley to its pre-contact condition. And people freaked out, cut down over 10,000 trees. How can we do that? But we wanted to clear that valley. And so we said, well, that's what we want to do. And so we worked hard, and it took a number of years, but we got them to approve clearing out 10,000 trees. And then we wanted to restore our native plants, and we're going to be putting 40,000 seedlings into the ground in the coming weeks out there. And those are the seeds that we've collected over the last 4 or 5 years at Quiroste Valley. We collected the seeds. Now we're going to be returning the seeds and start developing these larger, we call them patches of plants, as our, that's the way our ancestors managed the plants. It was in patches and such like that. And so now state parks wants us to start working. They wanted us to start working in other lands. And we said, no, we can only work here at Kidoste Valley. And so, but now they're having us to, Kidoste Valley was bigger than just the valley. It was a bigger area. So now we're working, expanding our work areas even bigger, but just the neighboring landscapes and stuff like that to do that. But here's the thing, whenever those Santa Cruz fires came through, it burned all the way around Kidoste Valley. It didn't go into Valley. And we believe, and state parks agrees, that it to a large degree because the way that we've been stewarding and managing and restoring that landscape, that the fire actually did not impact that valley. So there was evidence there. And so now the state parks is looking at this as being a model for how to manage other state parks and other lands. And I know that the Bureau of Land Management, for example, that's there in Santa Cruz and stuff like that, they're very interested in the work we're doing there, as well as a lot of the land trust and open space districts, in seeing the work that we do there, and they want to bring that indigenous fire and indigenous stewardship to the lands of their territory. So, the message is getting out. It's going to take time, but the message is getting out. And there are hurdles, but because of the work we're doing and the evidence that it's producing, people are willing to try to help us find ways over those hurdles.
We have just about 15 more minutes in our scheduled time together. So I will maybe direct us towards one more theme of questions and then leave space for any closing thoughts that either of you want to offer before we complete our time together. Several folks are asking about like higher government administration. Will change happen faster if more Indigenous people are in government, like Board of Supervisors or higher positions? Will Deb Haaland's recent appointment, will that make a difference in the work that you're doing? How do you see that impacting federally recognized tribes versus tribes and communities who are not federally recognized? And kind of lastly, kind of in that theme, a question about Biden's American Rescue Plan, setting aside over $10 billion for agricultural support for farmers of color. Do you see this provision positively affecting your land, farming, stewardship? Do you anticipate being in relationship with that plan in some way?
Well, let me start with that, and I'll start with that last one because it actually was a discussion I had this morning with a gentleman in San Francisco who is working on that issue directly with some Congress people. So I think that one actually is going to be, has the potential to be quite impactful. And I think it's more significant for Indigenous communities that are in collaboration with other communities. And there's lots of reasons for that are probably too lengthy to talk to, but I think the Indigenous communities that show a broad base of support and collaboration and have a broader impact are more likely to get those funds. And I think one of the projects that we're working on is likely to be able to tap in those funds. We also have to keep in mind, on one hand, $10 billion sounds like a lot. In terms of our budget and economy, it's not that much, given the scope of what needs to be done. But I also said that a lot of our communities are very small. We operate with limited resources, and we don't need a lot of resources. We're not going to go buy Mercedes and pad our retirement with them. We're using that money directly in effective ways. And so in some cases, seed money for other people is a huge amount for us that we can be very effective with. And so we're looking at some of those funds now to help our project, along with other possibilities like grants. And there are differences we're seeing in the philanthropic community, not so much because Native people are in those communities, but they're talking to the people in those communities and building relationships. But in government, yes, I think that will make a difference at the local and regional levels. I know that in certain sciences, like in climate change, we're starting to get indigenous people in there that are having an effect, and a lot of it is because they're being listened to. In the archaeology community, when I first started out almost over 30 years ago, I was sometimes the only one at the archaeology conference. Now we have contingents that go because that's where our culture is being talked about. And there's a number of archaeologists that are native with PhDs, and some of them are now even teaching in the universities, which is an incredibly helpful and hopeful change for us. So we are seeing changes in that community, cultural resource management and archaeology. We're seeing it in other areas of ecology. And I think it's both a combination of, we don't have as many trained people, I shouldn't say trained, people with the qualifications in modern sense of diplomas, because they certainly have knowledge. And those people getting into places of position and influence are slowly starting to change that community. So I think it's possible. And again, it comes to, is it going to happen fast enough? Well, it doesn't happen fast enough for us. But the question is, does it happen fast enough to have a effect before too much damage is done? And I think it's possible, but there's no time to wait. And certainly having Ms. Holland in that position is a dramatic difference. It's hard to say what will happen. I'm certainly very hopeful with this administration and putting her in that position. She wanted the position. She has ideas about it. And for me, one of the technical qualifications are certainly important, but she can bring those people on board. But for me, the highest qualification is, I knew people that were at Standing Rock and they saw her in the kitchen making soup for elders. To me, that's incredibly important and is a source of both pride and confidence that she's the right person for that position, because she's thinking of service, just like we've been talking about. We're in service to our land. We're in service to our people. So is she. So I'm hoping that she can make a tremendous difference.
Well, I talk about restoring sacredness to the lands and stuff like that. I do believe that Deb will bring, well, Secretary Holland, Deb will bring that that awareness and that need and that understanding to the job. The need to protect the sacred sites and not destroy the cultural sites and spiritual sites of these lands is really important. To not monetize the resources that are there. That's a huge one. There's so much pressure and demand on those things, and I'm sure that she'll be spending a lot of her time doing that. On that whole extraction industry and stuff. So that's going to be really tough on her. The tribes have a lot of needs. The federally recognized tribes right now, they are all underfunded. Every one of them has treaties that have been broken. And, they are all going to have their hopes and ambitions and desires that she can help them. So she's going to have a lot of demands on her. And I mentioned the broken treaties, and I just want to say for those attending the conference tonight, here in California, we have our broken treaty. In 1851, they sent a commission to California to negotiate treaties because there were all these people coming from the gold rush were going over to the mountains, and there was a lot of conflict in those mountains. The Indians were trying to keep them out, and of course, those gold rush seekers and stuff like that were trying to get up in those mountains, and so they sent commissioners to negotiate treaties, and they negotiated 18 treaties here in California. And just about all the California tribes did. I know the Mutsun did, and feel confident that, you know, that the Gregg's tribe did as well, signed those treaties. And then they sent them back to be ratified. And the California sabotaged them. They passed a resolution to not ratify the treaties, and then they sent a group of representatives to lobby on behalf of those treaties not being ratified. And so today we have a lot of federally unrecognized treaties here. I mean, a lot of unrecognized tribes here. But that's because the state of California sabotaged those. And you know, and so I'm hopeful that at least that story will be told and start making inroads that way. But as far as federal recognition for the tribes, you know, I don't see, under the current conditions, I don't, you know, without major changes, I don't think that I don't see that happening. You know, they talked about farming and stewardship and stuff like that. Farming and agriculture, those words right there are just totally foreign to indigenous tribes. We did not, you know, I mean, those that there are just the colonizers' words and ways. You know, colonizers, they, you know, they domesticated and dominated the plants, and our people didn't do that. Here in California, there was 8 different kinds of California Indian potatoes. They're all, you know, I mean, can you go to the store now and say, I want a California Indian potato? You won't find it. Because whenever the colonizers came in, they saw how closely tied the indigenous people were to these plant resources and the wildlife. I mean, they thought to destroy the culture, they had to destroy the environments. And that's what they did. So what we're trying to do is just restore the landscapes back to the pre-contact ways. And that right there will help us restore our food plants, our medicine plants, and our basketry plants, so that we can bring back our traditional diets and our traditional medicines, etc. The government, relationships, you know, I don't see, you know, I mean, I don't see them getting healthy, so it's gonna be hard to have healthy relationships with them. I know that recently Governor Newsom issued an apology to California Indians. And then he called for a Truth and Healing Council. And our tribe has a tradition, you know, has a just a standing policy or position that we do not accept apologies. But when we hear apologies, all we hear is, you know, hey, we apologize. Now will you shut up? You know, it's just kind of a way to try and make, you know, use the word apology and have somebody feel good. That doesn't work for us. It has to be followed by actions and change. And until we see that, we cannot accept that apology. And then the truth and healing, you know, the work that I've seen done by that truth and healing so far, it's kind of like, let's just find a way to go forward and be happy and get along. But it's not dealing with the past, and it's not dealing with the as recognizing the perpetrators must heal. It's just finding a path forward, and that's what they want to do. It won't work. So I'll stop there with that, though. Thank you.
We're also fortunate to receive what you both are sharing today. And I'm grateful that this session is recorded so that we can return to what you've imparted upon us. And as I mentioned, links to both of your projects and what you've invited us to participate in have been shared in the chat here and will continue to be a part of our community conversations all week. I would like to invite anyone who wishes to attend to a community space opening in about a half hour. It looks a lot like this, boxes on the screen, a keyboard maybe in front of you, wanting to foster as much connection person to person as we can in this adapted format. But I would like to leave the last words to our guests here. So you all know how to reach me via email. I'll be here at my station for the next couple of hours. And Greg and Val, I pass it over to you to close our time. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having us. These times are never enough time. Once people get warmed up and we can see all the questions and comments in the chat and the Q&A, and we appreciate that. Sorry we didn't have time to answer them all. It's hard to squeeze all the history we have, all the knowledge we have, and all the answers we might have into the short amount of time, because it's taken me, literally 30 years to acquire some of that knowledge, to be able to answer that. And they're nuanced answers. There's no clear, simple answers to any of this. It's a complicated world. It's become more complicated by the trauma that we have within all our communities. And I just like to say that I use a different term, not to disagree with the term that is commonly used, but I use the term community trauma because the other term implies that it was in the past. And it certainly happened in the past, but it has a living, effect in the present. So I use it as community trauma because it's our communities that are suffering now from what happened in the past. And they'll continue to suffer until the healing really happens. And so in that sense, I agree with Chairman Val in terms of some of the efforts like the Truth and Healing Council. I think it has important things it could contribute. Other efforts that have happened in the past also contributed. But as far as resolution, that remains to be seen what effect it'll actually have. And I know that sometimes, whether it's said or not, that these efforts want a quick resolution. Like let's do a plan and check off the boxes, and then we can just like put it behind us. And that's not how it works, not in human beings in this world, because logistics and practicalities and bureaucracies and all that stuff is one thing. Human emotion and spirit is a different thing. That's really the nature of this conference, is it not? Religion and ecology. And there's an ecology within us. And that has been damaged by what has happened in our past. The outward symptoms of it is the ecology outside, and it's reflecting the ecology inside. And a lot more than just truth and healing commissions have to happen in order to that be resolved. And it starts with individuals. It starts with them looking in the mirror, both as a society and as individuals. And it's not just us pointing at you, because actually that's the culture I grew up in. Taking personal responsibility, going out and saying, okay, what have I done today that is good? And if there's something I have done today that wasn't good, I need to go stop and take care of it. And not just, paper over it or throw some salve on it, but to do true healing based on the person that I injured or the thing that I injured or impacted. We haven't got to that level. We've put Band-Aids on most of our ills in society, and especially the ills caused in our historical truth of what happened that created the California that we're in now. And so that's the real work, and it starts with the individual. I think we've been doing it kind of backwards, or at least the way we've been doing it has shown that it hasn't worked. So perhaps another way should be done. And it starts with the individual. And then that individual links with other individuals, creating relationships and bonds and small communities that then bond together to bigger communities. And that's the way real change is going to happen, I believe. Thank you.
Well, just kind of a little summary kind of thing here is we need to, for all of us to heal, we need to tell the truth. We need to listen to people tell their story. We need to understand, and we need to listen with our heart. So many people, they think they listen with their their ears. It's actually with your heart that you listen with. You need to learn how to, you know, and we all need to learn how to listen with our heart. We need to let each other tell their story. And you need to tell your story of who you are and where you've been and how you got here, and share that with somebody, and listen to them, let them share their stories with you. Talk about what is a healthy relationship. A healthy relationship is honesty. It's truth. It's being truthful. It's having trust. It's what does it mean to have a healthy relationship? Look at that in your individual lives and your relationship with others. I know that what started us on that whole issue of relationships is that our youth, a lot of them, they're picking the wrong mates. They're picking the wrong partners in their life, and they're just, and you saw them, just making horrible decisions, and you see there's like a freight train coming, and they're standing right in the real railroad tracks, and you go, come on, please move, please do something else, and they don't. And so we had a tribal wellness meeting, and actually it turned into 3 tribal wellness meetings on how to find a mate. And it comes down to having to have a healthy relationship, take 2 healthy people. How could you have a healthy relationship with anything but 2 healthy people? And so we need to work on getting ourselves healthy first, and then helping to identify and help others get healthy if they're interested, or recognize healthiness in the other, unhealthiness in others, so we don't get hurt. I'm just going to end by saying what the true riches are. The knowledge, the indigenous knowledge passed down generation after generation for thousands of years, how to take care of Mother Earth. There's no experience or science that's needed for that. And that's listening with your heart and with your mind, and then having those good relationships with each other, with ourselves, with Mother Earth, with Creator. That's what we should live every day for. Thank you. And thank you again for having this event. And it was an honor and pleasure to be speaking with Gregg Castro.
Thank you all. Many gratitudes spoken in the chat as well. And I wish you all a good evening. Thank you for being here tonight.
Oh.